Welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm George Kane. I'll be your host tonight. The topic of tonight's program is compassion and choices. This is an organization that deals with end-of-life issues. Now, sometimes people ask why Minnesota Atheists would be concerned with end-of-life issues, don't we concern ourselves principally with issues of church-state separation. And we are also involved in issues in which the debate is heavily influenced by religion and religious ideas. If you'd like to know Minnesota Atheists' position on end-of-life issues, please go to our website and look up our public policy positions. My guests tonight are both leaders of the Minnesota chapter of Compasionate Choices. Janet Conn is the president of the organization, and Dr. Rebecca Thoman manages the legislative project in support of the Compasionate Choices Act. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. To begin with, can you tell us a bit about your organization? What is Compasionate Choices? How long has it been around? What does it do?
We've been around, we had our origins in the 1980s. We are the largest nonprofit advocacy organization in the country that's dealing with end-of-life issues. Our goal is to see that everybody has the widest range of options available for end-of-life care, and that those choices and decisions are known to the family and the physicians involved and documented and honored at the end of life.
What are some of the things the organization does?
We work through advocacy, and that's including lobbying and getting the vote out for our positions. Outreach, doing things like this to talk to people, meet new people, tell them about the issues. Education, we work with not just the specific choices at end of life, but also how to prepare for them with healthcare directives and advanced care planning. So we do educational things around that also. And there's also individual counseling of people who are dealing with those things at the end of life, families and individuals.
A couple other things that we do is we also have an initiative called Doctors for Dignity, where we work with physicians around the country who are also supportive of medical aid in dying and get them involved in their state campaigns to bring medical aid in dying to their state. We have a federal agenda as well, where we're working on helping patients who want to refuse unwanted medical care to be able to do that. We were part of the debate to get payment for at end-of-life conversations with doctors through Medicare. So we do a lot of work also at the federal level. And at the state level, primarily, we're working on passing authorization of medical aid in dying.
Right. And in states where that's already legal, we help to implement procedures and educate the medical system and help connect people to take advantage of those laws. Like in California, where it was just passed, there's a lot of work to be done to get it rolling.
Mm-hmm. So our medical director is actually visiting hospitals, hospice centers, to help educate the physicians on the protocol, how it works, the paperwork, et cetera. And so we're a big part of helping to educate the medical community.
Okay. I did want to ask one question about the advanced healthcare directives. Do you actually help people put their own together?
We can do that, yes.
Okay, so if people are interested in doing that, they can contact you.
Right, we have done workshops, various groups like church groups and so on, but we're available to help on an individual basis if somebody wants to talk about it, go over it, find out what this means, and so on.
Right. I did put together my own advanced healthcare directive a couple of years ago, and had to work with my daughter for months and months on it, and finally she decided that no, she would not be my agent.
Oh, really?
So I had to get my brother to agree to be my agent.
Well, sometimes the person that is closest to you that you think would be the obvious person isn't the right person because they don't agree with your choices, or if they're just too close to you to make those calls when you're in a crisis situation. They might not be the person to deal with that crisis.
Right. Yes, so Are there anything else before we get to the Compassionate Care Act that you want to
That's a
mention?
pretty good overview, I think.
All right,
Yep.
very, very good. Very good. So what is the Minnesota Compassionate Care Act?
Well, it is modeled after the Oregon Death with Dignity law that has been in place for about 18 years now. And it follows the same model as the other states that have authorized aid in dying, which include Oregon was the first, Washington, Vermont, and now California. Montana does not have an authorization process, although it is legal in that state. So it's really very much designed to follow from the Oregon model. So you have to be a terminally ill adult, really at the end of life, so with about 6 months or less to live, as based on a definition of hospice. You need to have full mental capacity, so you really have to be cognitively fully capable, making your own healthcare decisions, understanding the impact of those decisions so that you can decide for yourself. And then you also have to be a resident of the state. So those are the basic, that's who qualifies. And what we know, for example, in Oregon is that a very, very small number of people actually use this and actually qualify for it, because so many of us, the majority of us at the end of life, will not be able to make our own healthcare decisions, hence the need for healthcare directives. But for some people with certain kinds of diagnoses, especially cancer, ALS is another diagnosis, there are plenty of folks who are really in the throes of suffering at the end of life who could benefit from having access to this option.
Yeah. And sometimes the benefit is not actually using it, but knowing that it is available if the suffering becomes more than the person can bear.
And so the it is the ability to receive a prescription for a medication that will help them have a gentle death. So it's a barbiturate, a short-acting barbiturate, and they take that and usually fall asleep in 5 to 10 minutes and then ultimately stop their breathing. And that may take 15 minutes to an hour. But it's very well planned. Family can be involved. People can take advantage of this opportunity rather than going through the misery that their disease is really causing them. And I think people know about Brittany Menard, the young woman who really brought this huge awareness to this issue when she moved with her family from California to Oregon to take advantage of this. She had a terminal end-stage brain tumor and was suffering terribly. And then her family went back to California and helped pass the law there. So clearly there are plenty of people who at least want to know that this is an option for them should they need it. And so we hear a lot of people saying, why should I have to move to Oregon? Or why shouldn't I have access as well in my state? Why should only some part of the country have access to this?
Right. Where Minnesota Atheists gets involved with issues like this is that a lot of people are informed by their religions of what proper decisions are, and that's fine, but they want to then impose these through force of law on everyone else, whereas Minnesota Atheists' public policy position calls on government to honor these very private and personal decisions rather than restrict them by law.
Right, we're very convinced that this is a decision that has to be made by the person, and not only would it not be made by the church or a politician in our view, but also part of the bill is a protection against any kind of coercion or pressure from anyone around the person. So there's we're not just shunting people aside on our decision, it's that person's choice, option to go that way.
When the law first went into effect in Oregon, there were concerns about having plenty of safeguards in place so that there couldn't be abuse. And so there's a pretty stringent protocol where patients put their requests in writing twice, separated by 15 days. They have to see two separate physicians who have to concur on their diagnosis, prognosis, and their mental capacity. If they don't concur, then there's another step they take where they bring in a mental health consultation. The doctors have to give them all the information, all of the options. What's really good in the law that, in our bill that Senator Eaton brought forward, she actually, after hearing feedback from some listening sessions, she actually included that at a first visit, if a patient is not already evaluated and qualifying for hospice, they should be referred to hospice. And in fact, 90+% of the patients in Oregon, now it's 97%, are in hospice when they use this option. So I think there's a misconception that this is an either or. If you do this, you don't need hospice, or if you're in hospice, you don't need this. We see it as really an option in the whole sort of milieu of possibility at the end of life, and part of hospice care that applies to a certain criteria of people who may want to use it.
And some people will say, if you had adequate medical care and hospice care, then you wouldn't need this. And the fact that people are already in hospice care refutes that. And probably 99% of people in hospice will be taken care of sufficiently, so they'll be okay. But this is, there's always a small percentage of people whose suffering just can't be relieved, whether it's physical or emotional or psychic, spiritual, and that has to be respected.
All right, so let me understand a couple of these restrictions on who qualifies. It has to be a person whose prognosis is less than 6 months to live. But he has to be, the patient has to be sufficiently able to be able to self-administer.
Yes, and that usually means swallowing. So either by holding the cup up to the mouth or being able to sip through a straw. But also, there is an exception if somebody's on a feeding tube. If they can put the solution into the feeding tube themselves, that's considered self-administering. Okay. But it does not, what it rules out is any kind of an injection, and specifically an injection by another person. That's the protection. That the idea is that this is clearly what I want to do and not what somebody else is doing to me.
Yeah, I think it's good that there are so many protections. The protections seem to be so solid, but I wonder how much it's needed. In Oregon's 18 years of experience with this and the experience of the other states, have there been examples of coercion of anything like that?
Nothing has risen.
There have been no reported instances. No doctors have been charged or disciplined. And in fact, the nonprofit in Oregon, Disability Rights Oregon, which is the go-to for protecting disabled people's rights, they've not had a single complaint in 18 years. So I think a lot of the fear of misuse, which was 18 years ago, the fears were more reasonable because we didn't really know how this would play out. But now we have over 30 years of data from all the states combined that shows there really has not been a problem. So the fears are unfounded. Speculation. If we look at the data, we see that actually it works very well.
Well, that's certainly encouraging, promising. So how quickly is this movement developing? Is the bill under active consideration in a lot of other states besides Minnesota?
It is, especially after the Brittany Menard case, which was in the end of 2014 when she ended her life. The nation was just mesmerized by the whole event. She was on the cover of People magazine and everything. And so groups like ours, we have chapters in many, many states. Everybody said, hey, we really want to get this through in our state. So we were flooded with calls from new volunteers and people who are interested in the issue. So over 20 states, I think, have something brewing. Some have made it into their legislature, and some are still working on that. And in our case, we did have the bill introduced this year in March.
And Compasionate Choices is actually putting money and resources into 7 states to push this, because that's where we feel we have the best chance of success. So Colorado, and all the rest of them are East Coast. So Minnesota's like the next. We're in the next circle of, as we build our team of grassroots supporters, we'll move up into that, and we'll hopefully next year launch a really active campaign. But it's possible that Colorado will be the next state, depending on, now I know New Mexico had, there was a legal case in New Mexico to challenge whether or not aid in dying was lawful, and that is under consideration by the Supreme Court there right now. So New Mexico may be next, depending on when that ruling comes out. But we think Colorado may do a ballot initiative this year and have a very good chance of success. So more and more states are actually taking the step to make this law.
So what is that New Mexico case like, that they don't have any law against it?
Well, I think it was a case, usually it's in these situations, it's some doctors and some patients come together to bring suit to say that it's unconstitutional to deny us this right, and to tell doctors that they cannot issue these prescriptions and that patients can't receive this medication. And when it was first brought up, I think it was the district court, the judge said she couldn't think of any constitutional right that was more fundamental to human liberty than to make this decision about your own death.
Right.
And we were very encouraged by that, hey, this is great. But of course then it was appealed by the state and went to the next level of the court, and at that level then the judges disagreed and said, no, we can, it's not unconstitutional to make this law, just to prohibit this. So it is actually, I believe, still under consideration by the state Supreme Court.
Right.
So we do not know yet which way they're going to go.
Do you know if New Mexico has a specific argument as to what their compelling state interest in intervening is?
No. I think the standard thing is just people say, well, we're in the business of protecting life, and somehow that supersedes the interest of protecting human liberty.
Yeah. Now, this bill is specifically limited to assisted. What's the terminology?
Aid
used?
in dying.
Medical aid in dying.
Medical aid in dying, and specifically, you're excluding from consideration in this doctor-assisted dying and death. And
that is
euthanasia.
doctor-assisted.
It is doctor-assisted.
Assisted in the sense of they're providing the prescription.
Okay, but not in the sense of the doctor
Of doing it.
doing anything.
Right.
All right.
I wanted to get back to your question about
Yes.
where the bill is right now in Minnesota. So we had our first bill introduction last year. There was an informational hearing held in the Senate Health Committee, and there was just not enough time to really go into the details of the bill. There was no testimony taken. Instead, what they did was committed to doing a series of listening sessions. And so the Senate author, Senator Chris Eden, held listening sessions in Brooklyn Park, in Duluth, in Mankato, and in St. Paul. So she said held 4 of them in the interim, and hundreds of people came out to learn about the legislation. And then it came back this year for a hearing in the committee again. Lots of testimony on both sides, lots of misinformation. So she withdrew the bill because there was so much misinformation that there was not enough time to really rebut. So, but momentum is building. Lots of people have heard about this legislation now. We're getting a lot of people interested, and it will be reintroduced next year. I think the really important thing to think about is what will happen next year determines on what happens in our elections. So this is really a good time for folks who care about this to be talking to candidates who come knocking at their door, who they meet at events. They really have to ask them if they will support authorizing medical aid in dying in Minnesota. And we're going to have on our website and on our Facebook page, we will have some information about how to ask that question. But it's really going to be key that we talk about it now, because whether or not this passes, we'll know on November 7th, in part by who's elected.
And that's, it is only a state law though, right?
State law.
So you're concerned.
State senators, state representatives,
Right.
and they're all up for re-election this year.
And it's important to remind them that this is something that clearly has popular support. Anywhere from 60 to 80% of when they do various polls and surveys, people say, oh, well, of course this should be available. This should be an option that I should have. And when we go to conferences and fairs, and we were at the May Day Festival at Powderhorn Park last weekend, and it was just fabulous that so many people, it's just like, oh, of course, this is great, and then they express their interest and sign a petition and so on. It's very heartening to see the positive response we get.
So tell me about your opposition. Who is opposed? What do they do? Are there active organizations that
Well,
are involved?
basically, it's the same people that oppose abortion, reproductive freedoms. So we've got the Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life, who are very efficient at calling out the troops from church groups. They have connections with a lot of the Catholic churches, and sometimes an event will be filled with people in opposition that they've gotten the call. They have good phone chains or something. So it is that. There's some people that protest that they're concerned that it's going to create a duty to die, and there are all kinds of dire predictions of abuse and so on. And basically what we say to that is that that just hasn't happened, and we have sufficient safeguards. And look at the history. The other thing is, I would recommend, there's a movie called How to Die in Oregon, which shows various people going through this process and making decisions and working with their families and their doctors. And you can see that this is something that people are looking for. It's not some strange idea that is being imposed from without, but that people are very grateful to have this option available.
And I just want to add that I think that a lot of people are torn about this. There's a large group of folks who are religious and have mixed feelings about this. And we know from surveys around the country that even people who are religious support this option. So it's really a small group of vocal opponents. And my biggest concern is that they spread a lot of misinformation that frightens groups. I'm really concerned about disabled individuals who have been frightened, some who've been frightened by fear that this is really meant to exterminate them. All of that is false. There's been no evidence of that. And so I'm really worried about people getting misinformation. So this is really, thank you for letting us be here to give accurate information.
Yes, it's our pleasure. And as I said in the introduction, the political position of Minnesota Atheists is very much aligned with your political position. I think we have strong affinity there.
We definitely agree that it is a separation of church and state issue.
Yeah, I, every Good Friday, go to the local Planned Parenthood in an exercise in solidarity while the religious groups bring in busloads of people to demonstrate on the other side. In that case, we have police to keep the two sides apart. But so, what other educational work are you doing in support, other than coming on this program?
Well, we do speaking with a lot of groups, the Kiwanis and Rotary clubs, and as I say, sometimes a church group or a community group. And again, people are very receptive.
Okay, but there's no television campaign or any candidates doing?
Well, we have a very active Facebook page, so I would recommend people go to that to follow. Almost every day we're posting either new information from around the country, but especially focused on Minnesota. We also have, you can join our email list and be kept up to date on the happenings around here. We have a lot of high-profile events, and we are really going to start an effort this summer to, like I said before, have people start asking the question of their candidates. So we're going to have a really organized campaign around that so that everyone who we can get to bring this up will talk about it with the candidates, and that's going to be our major push this summer.
Okay.
We had people take a resolution to their precinct caucuses, and typically I've never heard of one that didn't pass in its precinct caucus and it's presented, and that would be, there are mostly DFL precinct caucuses, but there are people who say, yes, I went to my Republican one, and yeah, it was totally passed. No problem. So as I say, the grassroots level, it's very, very popular.
Very, very positive, yeah. Yeah. So currently, your feel of the way the legislature is feeling, if it were to come to a floor vote, do you think you have enough support?
Well, I don't think the question is really, it's not going to come to a floor vote, and we don't know what the legislature is going to look like next year, so we can't really predict. It's going to be up to how much passion there is in the grassroots about whether or not we can pull this off.
And it seems there's kind of a split in the parties, and which is kind of baffling. I always say this should not be a partisan issue. We all die,
Right.
Republicans and Democrats alike. So it's strange that it works out that way, and yet somehow when it gets into the political arena, you do get that kind of a split, which is a sad fact.
But in every state where this has passed, it has had to be bipartisan.
Oh yes, it does
So
take a bite.
that is a
Yeah.
big key to success.
Right.
So we need folks, no matter what party they're in, to be talking about this with their lawmakers.
Absolutely.
That's what makes a difference.
Yeah. And the question again that you want asked?
Will you support authorizing medical aid in dying in Minnesota?
Okay. So we've got 2 minutes left. I'll give you each 1 minute to close if you wish.
I don't have any closing statements that I...
Well, I'll continue to pitch getting involved, because I think there are a lot of things people can do. You can be a 1-minute activist by getting onto our email list, and when you get an alert, take action. It takes literally 2 minutes or less. Forward everything you get online. Repost our Facebook posts. So if you're a computer person, you can do so much in such a short amount of time. If you'd like to get more involved, we particularly need to hear from people who have stories. We're looking for people who actively would like to use this option, but can't because it's not allowed in Minnesota. We're looking for families who've had terrible experiences where a loved one did not have this option. So being able to come forward and tell your personal story is also very, very helpful. Then there's lots of kind of the typical volunteer stuff you can do, which is come to a table, be at an event. We're looking for folks who want to do that. But the most critical thing is everybody needs to contact, in one way or another, their lawmakers, your House member and your senator. And you can look them up, www.leg.mn. That's the legislator's website. And you just click on who represents me, and you'll get electronically linked right to them. And all you have to do is click on those links and say, hey, I support medical aid in dying, and I hope you will too.
And the other thing is just to talk with each other about it, talk to your friends about it, because a lot of people, when they stop by our tables at these things, they say, well, no, I really don't know much about it. So spread the word.
All right.
Spread
Well,
the word.
Thank you very much. This has been a very informative evening. I hope our viewers got a lot out of it. And I want to remind you that our contact information has been turning up throughout the program. And if you'd like to receive an issue of our newsletter, I hope you'll send us your postal address. If you send us your email address, we'll put you on distribution for our weekly calendar of events. And this is the newsletter, and if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.